Mary, 60 years old, stood strong in the cold light of the store. She had worked here for many years, her hands worn and calloused from months of handling boxes, clutter, and broken items that no one ever saw. But today her body bore an additional weight, not from the familiar physical tasks, but from the sharp words of Curtis, the manager. Although she had grown accustomed to long working hours and relentless demands, Mary still couldn't get used to Curtis's treatment. His gaze, always full of disdain, was like a sharp knife piercing her back every time he passed by. "Hurry up, old lady, don't make me repeat myself." His cold words made one feel sorry for Mary, but she only lowered her head and continued her work, telling herself there was no other choice. From the corner of the store, David, a new employee, witnessed it all. He couldn't do anything except stand silently, his conscience gnawing at him, but the pressure of fear held him back from intervening. He watched Mary work, her back bent under the weight that no one could see except her, and a feeling of sorrow rose within him. Eldon, a veteran employee, stood from afar and also sensed Mary's pain. He had worked at this store for years, having witnessed too many injustices against people like her. But like David, he could only stand still, his gaze lowered, unwilling to speak up. If you've ever experienced something like this, when no one stands up for you, when you feel forgotten and unappreciated, please leave a like and share this story with those around you. Perhaps those involved will realize the value of respect and recognition, and that is something Mary truly deserves. Mary continued with her work, saying nothing, but with every step, every heavy box she lifted, a silent story waited to be told. A story not just of physical exhaustion, but also of acceptance, of invisibility that no one could see unless they stopped to listen. The door of the store closed behind Mary as she stepped outside, but the exhaustion still followed her, heavier than the boxes she had carried all day. Her steps on the uneven sidewalk were slow and labored, her feet seeming to be tethered to the ground. The yellow streetlights cast a faint glow on her face, highlighting the deep lines etched into her skin. Her eyes, tired and sorrowful, reflected a quiet sadness that no one ever asked about. Mary wasn't just physically exhausted, she was mentally drained. With each passing day, she felt more and more invisible in this world. The people passing by glanced at her and then looked away, offering no kind word, no brief greeting. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, an old shadow drifting through their lives unnoticed. Mary had become invisible not just because of her age, but because she had nothing that would make people take a second look. This feeling was nothing new to Mary. She had grown used to being overlooked, to struggling each day without anyone acknowledging her efforts. Each day at work was a confrontation with the disdain of Curtis, a person who never failed to make her feel like a burden, despite all the sacrifices she had made for this job. But what hurt more was the feeling of being unseen. With every step she took, Mary felt the weight of life pressing down harder on her. Unpaid bills, reminders for her elderly mother to take her medication, concerns about her grandson Silas's future. All these things hung over her like ghosts, unseen by anyone. And none of that was noticed by anyone around her. They only saw an old woman going to work, carrying the weight of age and responsibility, but not the cost of each day she lived. This feeling of invisibility had become an inseparable part of Mary's life. It was something no one could feel unless they truly listened, unless they looked at what she was enduring. And if you've ever felt like Mary, overlooked and unappreciated, don't forget to hit like and share this story. We need to recognize and value those who quietly give everything, like Mary, those who work tirelessly to maintain the things that matter most to their lives. Mary's life was a long string of days filled with frustration and exhaustion, but she still walked on, never daring to stop. She still hoped that one day someone would see her true value, even though right now, in the eyes of the world, she remained an invisible shadow in the flow of life. After a long, exhausting day, Mary returned home, where an eerie quiet enveloped the space. The old door creaked open, and the air in the room felt heavy with unpaid bills. The dining table had become a mountain of papers, each one bearing a note. Unpaid, overdue bill, interest rates rising. The bold red numbers silently screamed, but Mary was too familiar with them. She sighed softly, set her bag down on the floor, and sat down, feeling each ache in her body. She didn't have much time to think about herself. Her mother, Ivy, was lying on the bed in the small room, breathing heavily, her trembling hands holding a pill bottle, but unable to lift it to her mouth. It was a sight Mary had seen countless times, and it always made her heart ache. She knew that one day her mother wouldn't be there anymore, but for now, Ivy's life still depended on the pills Mary had to manage every day. When Mary entered her mother's room, she gently sat by the bed, lifted a cup of water, and offered her a sip. Ivy, her eyes cloudy from age and pain, tried to sip a little water, but her breath seemed to be running out. Mary whispered softly, her voice trembling, "Mom, just take a sip. Don't worry, I'm here." These words, though small, were the only comfort Mary could offer her mother. Taking care of her elderly mother was a huge challenge. But beyond Ivy, there was Silas, Mary's grandson, whom she had taken in as her own after his parents passed away. Silas was the reason Mary could never stop, could never rest. The boy had to study in difficult conditions, and every time Mary saw Silas hunched over his desk with red eyes from lack of sleep, the pain in her heart grew. Mary's entire day was focused on how to handle the relentless difficulties. She knew she couldn't let Ivy run out of medicine or let Silas have a bleak future. She had to persevere, endure all hardships, and face the disdain, all to keep her family together. Every single day, Mary poured all her strength and spirit into those she loved. This sacrifice wasn't just about money, it was about the heart, the strength of love, and responsibility that she felt each day. For Mary, family meant everything. And no matter how exhausted her body was, no matter how the piles of bills kept growing, she could never give up. She might not have much, but the love she had for her mother and grandson was the only strength that kept her standing in this life. Even when her energy was completely drained, in Mary's eyes, each step, each action was a sacrifice with no regrets. And if this story reminds you of the silent sacrifices of a mother, grandmother, don't forget to hit like and share this story so we can all appreciate those like Mary, those who quietly sacrifice for their families and loved ones. Each day for Mary was an unrelenting battle. When she walked into the store, the harshness of the job awaited her. Shelves piled high with goods, carts rolling by in a hurried rush. But nothing was more urgent than Curtis's indifference and coldness, the manager she faced daily. Despite working here for years, Mary had never felt truly respected. "Hurry up, Mary!" Curtis snapped, his voice sharp as a knife, slicing through the air as if everything was just a machine. "If you keep moving this slowly, we'll never meet the target. No one has time to wait for your slowness." Mary bit her lip, trying not to let her frustration show. She was too familiar with words like this. Words that one might think could only come from someone who had no compassion. But instead of responding, she simply lowered her head and continued working, as a way to protect whatever little dignity she had left. The sense of injustice lingered in the air, and it wasn't just about the pace of the work. Every time Curtis came with orders like these, Mary felt her worth being trampled underfoot. The other workers, those struggling to finish their tasks in this suffocating environment, sometimes exchanged sympathetic glances, but no one dared to speak up. Those glances only made Mary feel more isolated. Eldon, a longtime colleague of Mary's, stood nearby, his hands trembling as he tried to move a box. He could see the weariness in Mary's eyes, but he couldn't do anything but remain silent and endure. He knew that while he may feel heartbroken by what she was going through, speaking up would land him in the same situation as her, a person treated as if they didn't exist. Eldon couldn't break the silence. He couldn't stand up for fairness when the price of doing so was too high. David, the new employee, witnessed all of this from a corner of the store. Though he didn't want to get involved in these conflicts, the injustice pierced his conscience like a wound every day. He watched Mary, saw how she persevered, and felt the resentment rising in him. He wanted to say something, wanted to intervene, but the invisible strings of fear and hesitation kept him rooted in place. He was still new after all. How could he stand up against Curtis, the one with the power to control everything? With each passing moment, the tension in the store grew heavier. People weren't working out of passion, they were working out of survival. Their jobs weren't just about earning money, they were about the internal struggle of keeping a life afloat in a system that didn't value them. Everyone was trapped in this cycle, and Curtis's cruel words only added to the pain. Mary, with every weary step, continued moving between the shelves beneath the relentless criticism of Curtis. She didn't have the strength to resist anymore, didn't have the energy to speak out, but in her heart, a flame still burned, one of anger and injustice that she couldn't accept. She didn't voice it, but she knew that one day she wouldn't be silent any longer. One thing was clear: Mary was not weak. She had lived her entire life facing challenges, and no matter how many times she was knocked down, she always stood back up. And one day, when the insults crossed the final line, Mary would find a way to face it head-on and show the world that, though age might weaken her body, no one could take away the respect she deserved. Each day that passed for Mary was not only a physical struggle, but also a mental one. She didn't just work hard to make a living, she carried an invisible burden on her shoulders, a burden of sacrifice, of unconditional love for her family. But in this environment, filled with indifference and coldness, that burden seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. When Curtis's footsteps echoed down the hall, Mary knew once again she would face his contempt. His cruel words, devoid of any empathy, were just a part of her daily routine. But instead of reacting, Mary simply lowered her head and continued her work, moving automatically and quietly. She didn't dare speak up, didn't dare protest, because everything had a price. If she said anything, if she reacted, she could lose her job. And that was something she couldn't afford. The cost of silence was immeasurable. It wasn't just humiliation, but the suppression of her emotions, the imprisonment in a world where justice and dignity were no longer valued. Mary couldn't speak out about what she felt. She couldn't express the daily injustices she faced. All she could do was continue working, carrying these burdens through each day without anyone noticing, without anyone caring. She was an elderly mother taking care of her sick mother and a young grandson struggling to study in difficult circumstances. All of these burdens fell on Mary's shoulders, but she never allowed herself to complain. Her silence wasn't because she didn't feel the pain or exhaustion. It was the silence of a woman who understood that life wasn't easy, and sometimes just standing firm without collapsing was an achievement in itself. Mary might feel the exhaustion, might feel her body growing weaker every day, but she still couldn't stop. She knew that if she stopped, there would be nothing left for her family. She couldn't let her mother go without her medicine, couldn't let Silas live in a home without enough food and love. Everything in Mary's life revolved around this sacrifice. Her sacrifice had become an inseparable part of her life, so familiar to her that she didn't know what she would do without it. In the quiet moments when she sat alone, staring at the unpaid bills, the threatening letters about disconnections if payments weren't made on time, she couldn't help but feel the pain in her heart, but there was no time to lament. Mary had to work, had to earn money, had to do everything to sustain the lives of her loved ones. Those long nights, sitting by her mother's side, worrying about her health, worrying about the future of her grandson, were the moments when she felt most alone. But she never allowed herself to go astray. Mary knew that even if her health grew weaker, even if her hands shook more than before, she had to keep going. Because she wasn't just a worker in the store, she was the only one left who could keep this family standing. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt the silent sacrifices of a mother or grandmother, don't forget to like and share this story so that we can all appreciate those who silently sacrifice for their families and loved ones. David, the new employee, stood silently from a distance, observing. He saw the pain in Mary's eyes, felt the weariness in her every step, but he seemed to stand outside of it all, unsure of what to do. Each time he saw her struggle through the day, he could only remain silent, swallowing the words he wanted to say. He had never faced a situation like this before, where everything seemed to be structured by injustice and invisible power. In reality, David had noticed the deprivation, the mistreatment, and the oppression that Mary had endured for so long. But still, he was a new employee. There was so much he needed to learn, and standing up against Curtis, the manager, was no easy task. He feared that any action on his part would not bring change, but only make things worse. However, the truth could not be ignored. After days of watching, David began to realize something more important than anything else. Mary was not just a hard worker. She was the one who brought warmth, care, and life to this place. She was the soul of the store, the one who kept everything running, not just through efficiency, but through human compassion. She gave everything without asking for anything in return. That day, when Curtis continued to ignore Mary's pain and even humiliate her, something inside David shifted. A feeling of unbearable frustration rose within him. He could no longer stand by and watch this injustice unfold. What he had witnessed, the mocking laughter, the words of power, made it impossible for him to remain silent. David asked himself, if I don't speak up, who will? Enough was enough. Mary's life could not continue like this. The lives of those like her, the unnoticed workers who were oppressed, forgotten, and disrespected, needed to change. He felt Mary's gaze, though she couldn't speak it, clearly needing help, needing change. And in that moment, David knew he could no longer stand idly by. He wasn't someone who could just watch from the sidelines without acting. David had decided that he would stand up, not just for himself, but for all those like Mary, those who were crushed, left behind in the shadows. He wouldn't allow Mary's sacrifice, her perseverance, to be seen as weakness any longer. He would confront Curtis, expose the truth that no one in the store dared to acknowledge. And so David's story wasn't just about injustice, it was a turning point in his life. This decision would be the first step in a journey he could never turn back from. Both David and Mary would walk through that door, facing every challenge ahead. That day, after the tense confrontation, David did what no one dared to do. He faced Curtis, not only speaking out about the injustice that Mary and the other employees had endured, but also exposing the dark truths everyone had tried to ignore. That conversation wasn't just a confrontation. It was a declaration of power, shattering the false facade of justice. When Curtis left, his face full of anger and defeat, everything in the store seemed to shift. The employees who had once been afraid and abandoned now began to look at each other with a different kind of gaze. Though there was no immediate, obvious change, the feeling of justice began to grow in their minds. It was time for workers like Mary to no longer suffer in silence. Mary, who had always silently endured, was finally recognized. After what David had done, she was not only seen as a capable employee, but as someone who deserved respect. And that moment came. Mary was promoted, not just because she was good at her job, but because of the noble qualities she had always shown: patience, kindness, and respect for others. She was no longer just a worker. She became a leader, a role model for every employee in the store. David's decision wasn't just an individual act. It marked a turning point, opening a door to fairness in a work environment that had long been filled with indifference and neglect. Mary was now not just an oppressed figure, but a beacon of hope for those who had been cast aside. She didn't just change her own fate, she changed the system, making everyone realize that work isn't just about assessing people by their productivity and numbers. Behind every person is a story, sacrifices, and dreams they're pursuing. The store began to change from that moment on. The other employees, witnessing Mary's promotion, no longer saw their work as a burden, but as an opportunity to grow and support each other. Their perception of work, colleagues, and the people behind the numbers began to shift. And Mary, with her open heart, became an inspiration for everyone. Her story wasn't just about a woman's promotion. It was proof of the necessity of justice and compassion in any environment. Sometimes change begins with a small action, but when it happens at the right time and place, it can change an entire system. If you find this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can spread the message of fairness and compassion to more people. The store was no longer just a place filled with numbers, statistics, and harsh regulations. It had become a place where human values, care, and camaraderie were placed at the forefront. Mary, now in her new role as the area supervisor, had not only changed her own fate, but also transformed the entire culture of the store. Things started to change when she implemented a fair policy, one she believed would help every worker feel valued, respected, and recognized. She began to change the way team meetings were conducted. No longer were the conversations only about work efficiency and sales figures. Instead, they focused on personal growth, the difficulties each person faced, and how they could support one another. Mary listened to everyone, understood their struggles, and offered encouragement, not just as a manager, but as a friend and companion. These conversations helped many employees, especially those like Eldon, who were older and had begun to lose motivation, to find their drive again and stay committed to the store. With her patience and open heart, Mary not only helped employees with their work, but also opened up opportunities for learning and development. Eldon, who had felt exhausted and drained after years of hard work, no longer felt alone. He began to feel the genuine care from Mary, and from there he found new energy, working with more enthusiasm, even though his age and health were no longer what they once were. For Mary, life was no longer just about numbers or long working hours. She had learned that life truly matters when we live with responsibility, compassion, and the ability to share with those around us. Mary, once a woman who was overlooked and oppressed, had become a symbol of strength, compassion, and perseverance. Mary's life was no longer just a series of long, exhausting, and painful days. Now she could see positive changes in her work, her life, and in the hearts of those around her. She had helped the other employees realize that work isn't just about earning a living, but also about growing and helping each other rise together. Mary's story is a reminder of the power of perseverance, compassion, and respect in any workplace. Even though life can be harsh, with support for one another, we can overcome everything. If you find this story meaningful, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe so that we can spread the message of fairness and compassion to more people. Thank you for following this story with us. If you found this video inspiring or it helped you see life in a new light, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your feedback. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any exciting and meaningful videos in the future. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next videos. Wishing you strength and confidence on your journey.